You're listening to the Big Cast, your source for the latest in financial technology. Brought to you weekly by the Best Innovation Group, with your hosts, John Best and Glenn Sarvati.
Welcome to another edition of the Big Cast. My name is Glenn Sarvati on behalf of the Best Innovation Group, where we like to do cool things with financial technology. And we've got an interview today that I think you're really going to enjoy. John Best and I both got together to speak with Tony Hernandez, the CEO of the Defense Credit Union Council, which is an organization that I think has really raised their industry visibility over the last year or so. It's a real evolution of a very interesting organization in my perspective. And we're going to get into a far-ranging conversation with Tony in just a bit on a very busy news week. So we're going to cover a few other things before we get to that interview, but definitely stick around. I think you're going to like this one. Remind you can always find out more about the Best Innovation Group by checking out our website, big-fintech.com. You can also join the conversation with us. We've got our CU Town Hall, the next one scheduled for Wednesday, October 15th. Those are live via Zoom. You can join us at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. As I always say, it is free to join. It is intended to be a lively, interactive conversation, so bring your thinking caps and your ideas. You can unmute your mic, you can go into the chat, but we have a great conversation with credit union leaders talking about the issues that most impact the industry today. If you go to cutownhall.com, you can find past sessions, recordings of those, and you can also request an invitation, because you do need to request an invitation in advance to join us. This week's topic, as I speculated last week, it looks like it's going to be quantum computing. We'll get into other current events as well, but there was a really interesting joint announcement between HSBC and IBM last week about an application of quantum. We talk about it a lot in a very kind of ethereal sense of, okay, what does this all mean? How is it going to actually apply to the everyday? It's still not, everyday retail transactions, but they went through HSBC using historical data, came through with some pretty interesting capabilities around bond trading and optimizing their ability to work the markets to their advantage based on totally legal, working on past data to predict the future. So it's interesting stuff, and it kind of raises some points about how credit unions can get involved in that space too. Again, cutownhall.com, Wednesday, October 15th. Drop us a note if you'd like to join us for the conversation. Another one that came up, we've talked before about our bingo card. We have got a couple more check marks on the bingo card. One good, I think, one bad, depending on your perspective. Bitcoin hit the $125,000 mark very briefly, but it did actually surpass the 125K mark. So that was one of the things that we had mentioned, and we'll post a link so you can follow along with the different items that we're tracking. And if you haven't already, it's not too late to play. You can catch up if you ask for your own bingo card. You'll get credit for everything that's already been checked off along the way. We'll post a link to that one. Another event this week that was already a check mark on our bingo card, but this just reinforces it further. You probably saw the announcement that Fifth Third Bank is going to acquire Comerica. And despite usually the way these are always positioned as mergers, this one is kind of a flat-out acquisition. That is a merger of two top 50 banks. There was already one of those earlier this year, Synovus and Pinnacle, but this just reinforces it. The Wall Street Journal is speculating on whether this might drive a new wave of bank consolidation. So that'll be interesting to watch as well. Fifth Third and Comerica were the 19th and 39th largest banks in the country, respectively. And depending on how you measure it, I keep seeing reports that say that it moves them into the top 10, still well behind the big boys, the Chases, the Wells Fargos, the Bank of Americas. Depending on how you measure things, I see them sitting at either 9 or 11 after this acquisition. I don't think anybody seems to have any question under the current administration that it will make it through the regulatory hurdles to get approval from the Department of Justice, which used to always be a question on these things, but I think it's a foregone conclusion. The other one that we have just checked off, silly us, we had actually kind of discounted this one back in April because we originally were thinking about it along those lines, a government shutdown. It didn't happen in April, and we kind of pushed it off the list. Well, guess what? It came back, and there is a government shutdown in 2025, as you well know. So that was another item that we checked off of the bingo card. For full disclosure, just as we get into this interview now with Tony Hernandez, we recorded this on day one of the shutdown. And we kind of consciously avoided mentioning anything about it because at the time we thought, well, maybe by the time we air this interview, it's going to be a thing of the past. Well, we're a week later and it ain't a thing of the past. We're still going. The first checks will be missed by government employees on October 15th. Whether or not they're working, a lot of folks are furloughed, so they pretty much already know they're not getting paid. But even the folks who are, required to still show up, which includes servicemen, I had no idea until it should have been intuitive, I guess, but I just assumed if we're being that cavalier about not paying folks that the military was still being paid. All kinds of assurances, yes, and it's always happened before. You will have your pay made up down the road, but it's still pretty weird to not get a paycheck. And that will be happening for the first time on October 15th. Credit unions are leaping into action, doing what we do best, as we always do in these types of situations. And this, again, ties into the Defense Credit Union Council quite well in this conversation we're going to have. If you go out to most credit union websites, particularly ones with a heavy military member base, there's all kinds of front page things. If you're being impacted by the shutdown, here are some options. So this is all great stuff. And again, the DCUC on their own website has some good suggestions and calls to action about how credit unions can kind of get in front of that issue. But one of the things that it kind of brought to mind for me is the whole notion of early wage access. And we just had a good conversation with a company called Veep Software on this that we talked to back at Finovate earlier in September. I'll post a link to that conversation again. But it kind of raised a question for me. Early wage access is based on the concept that A, you've earned your pay, and B, you've got a paycheck coming and you just kind of need an earlier access to that funding. Perfectly cool idea, but it's kind of premised on the notion that you know when that paycheck is coming. So if that amount it's going to show up is indeterminate of when you're actually going to get it, the people who are extending the access to those wages seem to have a different equation. So I asked around on that a little bit, and the answer seems to be, yeah, the model kind of breaks down to some extent. So exactly how earned wage access works during this time of shutdown for people who are actually impacted by it. I'm curious if anybody knows any more, but my sense is that may really be throwing some wrenches in the system on that one. One place that unfortunately is probably going to keep going strong. Again, I'm speculating here. And again, if anybody knows otherwise, please reach out. I'd be happy to share any information. Payday lenders. That's a little bit of a different model. And there's an awful lot of them real near military bases where a lot of people are being affected right now. They'll probably stay perfectly active. But if you think about the model of payday lending, which is somewhat different, they'll probably just take a bigger cut of the paycheck the longer it takes for that paycheck to actually arrive. So that could be some pretty rude awakenings when that comes down the pike, and really just, in my view, further increases the intensity of the adjective predatory when it comes to that stuff. But anyway, as to our interview, as I said before, the Defense Credit Union Council has taken a very visible role over the course of the last year. John Best is the one who's had more conversations with Tony Hernandez going through this process. And I've had several with Jason Sturrock, their head of advocacy. But we wanted to get back in touch with Tony to see what he's got to say. And again, this was not specific to the shutdown, but you'll probably hear in terms of working with the military and things along those lines, there's definitely some threads that relate both to the here and now as well as the broader aspect of how we can support the overall credit union business. So let's have a listen. Tony Hernandez, CEO of the Defense Credit Union Council. I know you two kind of put this together, and I'm to some extent kind of playing catch up, but on the other hand, I've worked closely with your colleague Jason Sturrock, who you brought in about a year ago now into the organization?
A little about 15 months ago.
Yeah, and he's been a guest on the podcast before, and I know you've actually stepped up on your advocacy. And there's a great article in the CU Daily that you had the interview with Frank Diekman about a month ago. We'll post a link to that as well, and that kind of got me going on some of the thoughts here. And I know you've had some really interesting news about kind of the expansion and kind of a new approach you're taking to the organization. One of the things that I think really kind of brings that into focus is you've added Suncrest Credit Union, which I think most people would not typically think of as a defense credit union. So it kind of speaks to kind of the direction you're taking. So Thanks for
Yeah,
joining us. But maybe start there in terms of the trajectory.
well, I appreciate that, Glenn, and John. Thanks for having me here today. It's an honor to, get the word out in different audiences, and certainly, this is an important audience to talk to. Yeah, DCUC is growing. We fill a void in the industry, provide another voice. Sometimes it's a second opinion, that's needed. And the United States is a diverse nation. There's all kinds of viewpoints and interests. And so we represent really all credit union interests, but we sort of put a veteran flair on that, and it's not dominated by military and veteran, but it's certainly something that opens doors for us on Capitol Hill.
You're a military veteran yourself. Were you involved with credit unions during your time in the military, or how did you make the transition into this role?
Well, the first credit union I joined in 1994, and I was already in for 2 years. I had a job in the B2 system program office when it was still, I think they had just revealed the first one and we were getting ready to deliver the second one. So it was still a top secret. They call it was it was still a black project, right? It was in the dark. And the system program office was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And I joined the Wright-Pat Credit Union, Federal Credit Union. That was the first credit union I joined. And I tell Tim Mislansky that every time I see him. You guys were my first credit union.
Yep.
Just sticking with them, throughout. So that was my first inject into what credit unions were.
It's funny because when my first exposure to credit unions, and we've had a great discussion about this, but my background is my dad was, I've lived on, I feel like every other base in the world. And I didn't know credit unions weren't military until I was out of high school. You know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah.
I lived abroad. You keep, every time I talk to you, you're like, well, I was in Krakow, Poland yesterday. But for me, it was Pentagon Federal Credit Union. That was on the base. My dad was Army, but I remember we also were in the Philippines for a while, and I remember Navy being there. So I think there's a natural sort of connection between the military and credit unions, even if it isn't a direct military segment. You know what I'm saying? Like I think that our serving men and women see credit unions sort of because of the Pentagon. They're great, and Navy and all the other military credits because of their great service and what they've done. Ent is another great example. A lot of people don't know. They think it's the ear, nose, and throat credit union, but it's actually named after General Ent, believe it or not.
That's right.
Who was he was a 5-star general of the ear, nose, and throat division of the Army. Actually, he had a base named after him. And here's your trivia question: do you know which base and what it is now, Tony? In Colorado Springs, it's no longer his base. It's now the Olympic Training Center, believe it or not.
Okay.
In Colorado Springs. That used to be General Ent's base, and that's how Ent was named. Again, not the ear, nose, and throat credit union as people thought, but yet, all of those big military credit unions also serve the public in a general way. They serve everybody in their areas. They've grown. They've been some of the more well-run, not some of them were, all of them are well-run credit unions. Great, most credit unions in general are very open to military people. So I see that affiliation. I'll stop there
you said something really important there, John, especially using the Ent credit union as an example. I mean, when DCUC started in 1963, there were the credit union movement on military installations was big, and a lot of our member credit unions, they started with 10, senior enlisted members putting $100 into a hat and forming a credit union so they can make loans to people. And at the time when DCUC started, there were 450 bases out there. We've winnowed that down through base realignment and closures. And so a lot of those credit unions just sort of grew into community charters because they had to. And we saw that accelerate during 9/11 because access to base got restricted. And in order to survive, a lot of credit unions went to community charters, but their roots are still, with the base, just like you mentioned with Ent Credit Union. And that kind of gets us back to our, the way we're able to expand is, for a long time, military used credit unions because there wasn't any branch offices out in these remote sites where these military bases were located. So we had to have a credit union out there. And we had to have the Armed Forces Financial Network, which is a debit network. When we went to direct pay or direct deposit, direct deposit. It was called SurePay, and then later on became direct deposit. And the big interchange companies, Visa and MasterCard, weren't on the basis, so we created our own. And the history of defense credit unions is it's fascinating. When even for the wider industry, U.S. Forces Korea commander, a 4-star general, wanted to have a credit union overseas in Korea to help balance out what was going on with the banks. The problem was that credit unions couldn't accept checking accounts. They didn't offer checking accounts by law. Yep. And so DCUC at the time led the charge and got the legislation passed. So now, I think in 1979, I might have the year on. I think it was 79 when it finally got all worked out. But now credit unions offer checking accounts. And so
I have a funny story about that. I worked for Bucky Sebastian, who a luminary of the credit union space, one of the people that put the NCUA together, and also just a damn nice person. And he used to tell us, can't call it a checking account. We're not legal. It's a share draft.
Right.
And, that was the name of it in 71. That's how they got it through, because they said, hey, you can have a co-op and people want to get their money out. And so that's why a lot of credit unions still inside. For me, I don't even hear either term. If you say checking account or share draft account, they're the same to me. It doesn't even register, as I'm thinking about it. So you're right. There's been a lot of big things done in that space. And, like I said, I remember getting paid from the commissary. You'd go stand in line, you'd bag groceries, you'd take them out on the cobblestone, which was not fun, on their little carts. And then you'd go, I'd take my money, I'd get paid in American dollars. I'd go over to the Pentagon Federal Credit Union and turn it into marks and go buy a big giant remote control car. That was pretty much my MO out in the German population. But yeah, and AFES, Athens Network, it's funny. It's a whole different aside, but I was really thinking the other day about how Navy could really benefit from stablecoin with their closed loop system, but that's a whole nother aside.
Sure. You make a good point that there's a whole foreign exchange, which probably in most credit unions doesn't sound like it's real central to the business, but that becomes pretty fundamental.
Right.
Very really special purpose to come out.
And it's a whole nother podcast. I'm sorry, but Glenn's like, he went down that rabbit hole so fast. He's like, John's right.
Anyway. No, that's
the kind of thing
plenty of material.
That's the kind of thing your group wants to explore and to lead the charge on, because it's different for everybody, right? It's a different use case, but it could be for everybody, because I know lots of credit unions that are not a pure military credit union. They have military segs.
Absolutely. There's, what I always said, if we just focused on just military, active duty military, by law, that's limited by fiscal end year strengths. In the National Defense Authorization Act. And so there's only so much you can do with $1.2 million, members of the active duty military. But, if you look at the VA will tell you there's 18 million veterans out there that are still living today, that still need access to funds and checking accounts and saving accounts and loans. And the VA said this, is that every zip code has a veteran in it. And because of that, it's easy to say, and I'll bet anybody a Diet Coke, that every credit union has at least one veteran in their field of membership.
Oh, I would go further than that, but I used to think wrongly when I first joined the credit unions that one of the ways you could join is if you were military or previous military or active military. I thought every credit union could take you if you were. That should be.
It depends on their membership rules, but you think that would be automatic, right? Because you served the country.
Yeah.
And you ought, that ought to be.
Especially the federal credit unions.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually we do work with the VA on the Veteran Benefit Banking Program, and that was a program that VA started because actually I think as of today, the federal government isn't printing checks anymore. But the VA started because a lot of veterans, particularly senior veterans, were still getting paper checks in the mail.
Oh, wow.
If you were unbanked, You had to take it to a check cashing, window and lose a
And
lot of.
lose.
You had to pay a
Yeah.
fee, or if you're homeless, right, then you could, you risk losing that paper check or where did it get delivered to, and a lot of the money was going unclaimed. And so they worked with us and the military banks. Anyone that would offer a free checking account to veterans. And last time I checked, all credit unions offer a free checking account, and that way they could get their monthly benefits directly deposited in their account. And that's
Yeah.
kind of what opened our eyes, saying, this could go nationwide, and so let's open up our membership. I think I've said it many times before. Sometimes the name Defense Credit Union Council is sort of a barrier because people don't see themselves in that name. But when you say, "Do you serve veterans?" and they shake their head up and down, then yeah, they could be a member of DCUC.
Yeah.
A little bit of history on that too. We started out as a CUNA council. That's why the last C in that acronym, DCUC, is council. We were the Defense Credit Union Council, and so our roots go back to CUNA. When a lot of the 450 military credit unions on base were having issues with the Pentagon, that's how DCUC got formed.
Wow.
And so we maintained that affiliation until 2018 to be exact. I think it was March, when we amicably, broke from CUNA, and went on our own as as our own trade association. And that's when we got involved in advocacy. And it really was just me, and I worked with a guy named John McKechnie, who a lot of folks in the industry know. And we would partner on letters. We do joint letters with CUNA and NAFQ. We'd send in letters of our own, and we were getting into the advocacy game. And at first, a lot of there was some from the graybeards in the industry, the retired admirals and generals. It's for military members, it's a cardinal sin to talk to a member of Congress. You just don't do that as a military member.
Right. Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, how do we call ourselves a trade association if we're not going to advocate for our members?
Right.
Especially when there's military unique things and veteran unique things, we actually have an important voice. And so that was a huge shift in our strategy and our delivery. Hiring Jason Storak as our chief advocacy officer, and that was in April of 24 when Jason came aboard. And that's been a game changer. I mean, Jason's just done wonders with advocacy and kind of honing our message and opening up more doors. And that's why I don't want to change our roots, our red, white, and blue, our name, because we spent 63 years building that. And so I don't want to give up, that part of our heritage and our message. But, we'll be talking in our board planning session coming up on, do we need to rebrand or create a different brand so that everybody can see
it's funny you say that. When I was at GTE Federal Credit Union, which is still called GTE Federal Credit Union, again, back to Bucky, he did a search because Verizon bought GTE and everybody thought we were going to become Verizon Credit Union. They did a name recognition, something or other, and they found that, if you want to be hated even more or more hated a lot, then Verizon's a good name for you. If you like where you are, because we were serving former GTE people who had a very fond memory of the company, and know that it was so they'd still stay GTE. So maybe you can keep your name and just come up with a new thing. I think now GTE stands for something else different for them, but maybe you can just come up with some other acronym. The D's the problem. It could come up like I don't know that there's a dog credit union council. Or people love dogs. Let me tell you that. You could build a dog. You could build a dog thing. Anyways, in all seriousness, though, I know you travel around the country. You speak everywhere. Well, who was the first domino to fall to join that wasn't a military credit? I'm just curious if you know.
It's now you're taking me back 4 years. Wow.
While you're thinking of that, I mean, one thing that caught me off guard that I did not realize until you and I were just talking before, Tony, that your member base already represents about a quarter of credit union members. I would not have guessed that. I don't know how much of that is the core, defense oriented ones that people would normally think of. But you start adding the Suncoast and folks like that, I guess that number adds up in a hurry.
Well, John, you sort of alluded to this. When you were growing up, and thought everybody was a member of a military credit union.
Yeah.
Being on the base and having just the throughput. People would enlist in the military, do their first term, maybe do a second term, maybe do a career, but they stayed with these credit unions as they moved throughout life. And I had CUNA's economist a couple of years back take a look at just the DCUC segment and compare our growth rate with the rest of the industry. And the growth rate of defense credit unions was larger. And I suggested, and I'm pretty sure there's a way to prove it, but the reason why is that I remember just hung around a lot. When they were getting good service from their credit unions, then they extended that to their families, and it stayed that way for many years. And so the membership growth has just has just grown over all the years. And
this is all speculation, but I would think not only do you have that loyalty factor that keeps them as members, but I bet you've got a better strength in terms of primary relationships as well. Yep. You can be a member and still wind up kind of splintering off and putting your money elsewhere. I would suspect, and it's purely just my belief, I don't have any basis of data to back it up, that you probably have a greater share of wallet as well.
Well, I would think so. It just, secure. I know these guys. They've never led us wrong. I mean, we see that anecdotally, throughout our membership. But as we grow, maybe we'll hire an economist to figure.
I have a different theory, Tony. Here's what I learned. Every time I ever saw the credit union on the base, it was right next to, what's the name of them? Class
6 store.
The Class 6 store. For those of you who are not, do you know what the Class 6 store is, Glenn?
I think is it like the PX, something like that?
Not kind of.
No. Go ahead, Tony.
It's the alcohol. It's the liquor
store. It's the base liquor store.
Okay.
They were always pretty close by each other. But, it's funny because as cards moved out there, I couldn't go to the Deutsche Bank and join the Deutsche Bank when I lived in Stuttgart. My only option for a bank account was on the base with Pentagon. I'm not saying that I was a captive audience, but they did a great job. It never occurred to me that I needed anything else, for one thing. And, you think about, I'm just making Glenn's point, the primary. But tell me about how you're kind of changing things. You were just talking, God, you speak, every time I talk to you, like, well, I was just in Krakow and now I'm in Canada. And you seem to be kind of getting around and really getting a good flavor for, it makes sense because of the basis, but for, the world. I think your vision of this, particularly on some of the things that are out there, like you and I have been discussing quantum, and I'll Glenn and I'll let Glenn speak to this. We just spent 2 days with the chief cloud architect for quantum from IBM. And, it really does, if you look at quantum and the arms race that it is, it really does kind of dovetail into your world. But you mentioned it. What are you finding when you sort of field test this stuff?
Well, when I mentioned, and of course, I fell in the same category about 3 months ago when I first heard the term. It's been around for a while, but I think it's coming. It's one of those. It's like that. Was it the Atlas 3I phenomenon that just got discovered, and all of a sudden it's a big deal?
The interstellar object that we're all fighting, whether it's an alien ship or
and it's signaled, all that, and why the generals were called to Quantico yesterday.
I've seen all. Sure wasn't fitness. It was definitely aliens. I know that.
Yeah, exactly. But I kind of look at it kind of like if I'm trying to find a parallel metaphor for that. But I think the Atlas 3I interstellar object only got discovered in late June, early July. Yep. And I kind of see that parallel with quantum. It's been, I'm sure the Atlas 3I didn't just start then. It started, a long time ago, but it's coming in fast and hot. And when I was asked to speak on regulatory matters at the ALM First Financial Forum in Canada last week. And so I talked about Genius Act and, the regulations that'll be promulgating from the law that was just signed, and that gets into share stable coin and how people are going to deal with that. And then I was talking about a whole bunch of regulatory stuff, including debanking and cyber, and then I asked the audience a question. I said, well, how many of you have heard of post-quantum computing? And about 20, maybe 25% of the audience raised their hands. The rest of them, after the next 30 seconds, when I started to saying what it was, I noticed a lot of them were
phones out,
Googling to figure what it was. And it's coming fast. It's approaching our credit union solar system pretty quick. And my recommendation to the crowd is don't freak out like Y2K, but you need to take this seriously.
Yep.
You need to study it. You need to ask questions. I'm sure there'll be a QSO or some industry response to it. I know some credit unions have hired some smart people, either from Visa, MasterCard, or the U.S. government. In fact, after today, there might be plenty of those looking for a job after the government. That deal with cryptology, right? And understand that. And so
just to say, there's a simple thing, and you could tell your audiences this, that everybody can do, which is a crypto inventory. Okay, so whenever you have a connection to a third party, let's say that you're connected to Valero, Chuck, good friend of, I'm sure yours and mine.
Yeah.
And that connection, a VPN by its very nature uses cryptology to obfuscate the packets and everything that goes between the credit union and the third party. The nature of that cryptology could be a lot of different things. It's not all one just kind of cryptography. It could be anything. And so you don't know whether you're using a quantum resistant algorithm in order to accomplish that VPN. By the way, it's perfectly possible because it's not going to break all encryption, but certain kinds of encryption, it'll roll through like butter. And so the idea that you could go out right now and at least start building a crypto inventory, and a lot of people don't know, but NIST released the National Infrastructure
Institute.
Yeah. They released their guidelines as to what to replace them with. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, the hurricane's coming, but it's way out there. It's down by Africa, maybe you don't think you need to leave. But you could at least start, measuring the windows. And that may come to nothing. It may not come anywhere near us, and it may be okay. But when by the way, it's just good practice, I think, to know what. Yeah. And a lot of our credit unions have done that, the ones we work with for the Innovation Club. And it was a good exercise because it also unearthed things that, should be kind of quantified anyway. So that's something you can tell the audiences that they can start with, is just a crypto inventory. Like, it's not just that too. It's like anytime that, you've got passwords on your, how you send something, you put secure in the subject and it sends through, a secure file or zips it up in a secure way. Is that cryptology safe? So, because guess what? When this first hits, it's not going to be, and this is right in your wheelhouse. When this first hits, it's not going to, we won't know about it until we hear about it, and it'll be state actors. Like, I'm confident the United States will get there first, but other countries will be right on the tails of it. China, I don't know if you know this, but China's been collecting those big balloons that float over our world that we shoot down sometimes?
Yeah.
They're actually collecting encrypted data. And you know why? They can't decrypt it now, but they think much more long term, I think.
Sure.
And they're thinking, hey, soon I'll be able to decrypt this. And context, turns out, is very important. So even if it's old, knowing who's talking to who, what's talking what. I just picture my favorite part about those Chinese balloons. You know what the other thing they collect is, Tony and Glenn? The SSIDs. One of my favorite little pastimes is anytime I go somewhere, I turn on my Wi-Fi so I can see, especially in the city, so I can see all the different SSIDs. People come up with some funny stuff like FBI,
NSA
FBI
surveillance
van.
man.
I saw one the other day. It was called Bootylicious. I don't know what that means. There, people. I like. This is my Wi-Fi, Nacho Wi-Fi. I've seen that one, NACHO Wi-Fi. But they're collecting all of that. They are collecting as they roll over there, and so is Google when they drive by, with their map and Earth. So people don't realize, and that's what I'll tie this all back to Atlas. So clearly we've been sending out these annoying signals forever. I think they're coming to shut us up. We're a noisy neighbor. They're tired of us, all of our SSIDs broadcasting out in the space. God knows they're probably just now getting the Dick Van Dyke Show, and they're here to just shut us up. Yeah,
what was that? Those poor souls on Gilligan's Island.
Yeah, they're here to save Gilligan and his folks. But anyways, I take it to that spot because I think it's right. I think it's missing. I think it's right in your wheelhouse, and I love that you're doing it. So
yeah, and we'll preview coming attractions. We want to do more informational stuff like that, working with folks, such as yourself and Glenn, and getting the word out and putting together some meetings or conferences in order to do that. I like the idea of a quantum inventory. And again, I don't want to create panic because there are things you can do now, but you got to start now. And I thought an interesting comment I had, is like, well, Tony, I'm retiring off the board or retiring from CEO, so I don't need to worry about it. I'm like, yeah, you do. Because where's your money stored?
Right.
I'm retiring. Who cares what happens? You're gonna pull it all out, put it in a jar, and bury it in the backyard. What's your plan?
Yeah, go buy gold bars and put it in the walls. It didn't work out for a senator too well, but people do that. But the other thing I brought up was with stable coin also, and some people are like, that's just newfangled, and we're still focused on teaching people how to write checks, and the thing I brought up with is there's like, I think the numbers, is it 84 or 82 trillion dollars in generational wealth transfer that's going to happen.
Yep.
It's coming, and that's going to, it might skip my generation, Gen X, and go right to millennials and Gen Z, or Gen Y and Gen Z. And they're already using, crypto coin or.
Well, yeah, they're natives to that sort of thing, and then we're in an increasingly global world, like it or not, and there are a lot of a good example. A lot of my friends, and I just ran into somebody just like this the other day, where a military serviceman had married someone who was like a German national.
Yeah.
And had kids, and they live on the economy because that's how it worked out. And a lot of them, when they retire, they stay there nearby the base. They cross the hall, and all of those folks really could use something like that to for the conversion rate and sending money home. Or let's get back to, so anybody could join.
No, as long as they're a federal credit union or chartered in the state, as long as you're headquartered here in the United States, you can join.
If their CEO or their chair can fog a mirror, they can join. Is that what it is?
But I have worked. I had Defense Bank from Australia reach out to me, and I briefed their board because in Australia they can't call themselves a credit union. They actually lost their taxation battle, and now they do get certain breaks, but they're all banks. And so I had Defense Bank, defense with a C, bank reach out to me, and they're interested in creating their DCUC equivalent, their trade association for cooperative banks that are located on Australian military installations. That you bring up an interesting point. Something I'll have to put on in front of the board is how do we partner internationally? When I was in Poland and Krakow, I went, my first trip to Poland was in 2018. And I remember talking to President Rafał Matuziak of the Polish Credit Union Trade Association. He's the president and CEO of that. And I mentioned, there's a lot of pride in Poland's military, and you see symbols all over, and just an enormous amount of national pride. And I asked the question, well, where does the Polish army soldier put their money? And then most of them put it in the national bank because it makes sense. But why not a Polish credit union? Same thing with Australia. Why not Defense Bank and grow the same same thing over there. And so, yeah, I find that might be, leading to some more discussions as DCUC continues to grow. Right now, we're growing our
it's a bit of
national
a
market.
security risk to force them off the base to go
Yeah,
to go bank, in a way.
sure.
Especially because something as sensitive as money. I mean, there's, because we were always, shh. By the way, internationally, I also think there could be value with the stablecoin network there.
Yeah, yeah, especially a lot of people travel, and
Yeah.
one of the things I learned is you always pay in the foreign currency. It asks you want to pay in US dollars or Polish zloty, and I always pick Polish zloty because it's a better rate.
Yeah, it's a better rate, but you don't know.
Uh,
People don't know to do that.
no, or
And
to even turn on your credit cards when you're
yep,
overseas because they
when you're
lock down
abroad.
automatically. Traditionally, our military credit unions understood is when things were kicking off and how to keep transactions, secure.
Yeah.
There's a joke here in DC is when the Pizza Hut and the Domino's and Papa John's orders are going through the roof right around the Pentagon. Something's going on because all the parking lot's still full at night and all the planners are there planning something. But I think going back to operational security, that's why a lot of people stayed with them. And then if they got civilian jobs, with the Department of Defense or Department of Defense adjacent or even a contractor, those credit unions became important. So that's how our corner of the industry has maintained its growth, Glenn, going back to your question, and why for years we've always been about a quarter of the industry, and a lot of people didn't realize how big DCUC is. Now that we're adding, new credit unions that serve veterans, I see us quickly hitting about a third of the industry and on to a half, and then who knows beyond. Um, and it's starting to pick up a lot of steam, and we're very happy about that. And so we'll be hiring, additional staff members here. DCUC is only 7 people right now, and that's up from the 4 when I started. So we've been on this growth arc for a while now, and I'm pretty excited about the future.
So a couple more loose ends to tie up from that interview. Tony at one point mentioned that the government stopped printing checks he had heard on September 30th. That may unfortunately be more literally accurate than it ought to be because of the government shutdown. But with regard to the idea, and I think he's referring to the executive order that President Trump put out back in, I think it was March or April, saying that the government would no longer issue paper checks and electronify things. We've already covered this, and there's a blog that I'll post a link to. Tony is reacting to the basic news stream, from what I can tell, the executive order, as well as a press release put out by the IRS at late September about this event. You read the fine print, and like a lot of other things these days, it isn't exactly what the headlines say. They haven't stopped. They're not stopping. The IRS says they're starting the process of doing it. They've been starting the process of doing this for about 20 years. And if you read the fine print of the executive order, it says we're going to no longer issue paper checks except for these cases in the fine print. And those cases in the fine print pretty much account for every check that's still being written by the government. I'm looking at this with a somewhat jaundiced eye. Take a look at the blog if you're interested more about that. But again, as always, I'm happy to hear different opinions if you know of anything otherwise. But there seems to be this odd desire to really push on this paper check thing, which, given all the other things going on in the world right now, does not strike me as a real, it's neither low-hanging fruit or very tasty fruit to be going after. During the interview, John Best also mentioned Verizon, and he was talking about their bad reputation as far as branding and naming relative to GTE. This goes back to 2002 and the state of the mobile networks back then. Interesting timing that this just popped up just yesterday. If you haven't seen, Verizon actually has a new CEO, and it's a name that you may recognize. It's a guy by the name of Dan Schulman, who had retired from his role as the CEO of PayPal just a little over a year ago, I think. So he's back in action, a very different business. But remember, going back again, probably to around that same time frame of 2000, Well, no, we know exactly when it was because of the fact that they had a very unfortunate choice of their branding. Remember, the mobile carriers once thought that they should be central into the mobile payments process. And they even started a consortium to do that, which they happened to call ISIS, which wound up being a pretty big mistake after 9/11. That never developed. But we do know that the mobile carriers like M-Pesa do play a big role in this space in other countries. Will Dan Schulman bring his payments experience and revisit this idea? I don't know. He's probably got bigger fish to fry again over there too, but just something to think about. It's an interesting twist, and congratulations to Dan Schulman. I think it's a big job and an interesting job, and he did some really cool things at PayPal. So interesting to see where he takes it from there. With that, another episode of the Big Cast in the books. You may have noticed we kind of stopped short because we had so much good content. We stopped kind of in midstream with Tony Hernandez's interview. We've got more good content there, and we're probably going to be coming back to that with a part 2 of that interview over the course of the next couple of weeks. So we'll keep you posted on that. As always, you can find out more about the Best Innovation Group by checking out the website, big-fintech.com. If you go to the media tab there on the website, you'll find all our past episodes. And again, if you go to the show notes, which you should be able to find both there on the website as well as wherever you check out the podcast, whether it's Amazon or Spotify or Apple or whatever. We've got links to a lot of these things that we've been talking about throughout the conversation. The blog about checks, the Defense Credit Union Council itself. We love to kind of get into the details of all the interesting stuff going on in the payment space. There were other things we didn't even get around to talking about that I think is really kind of front and center as far as what's going on these days. A couple of big new global payments reports just came out over the course of the last week or so, both from McKinsey and BCG. We'll have more conversation about that coming up, but they're out there. I'll go ahead and post links to both of those, so if you're interested, you can download them, but we'll get into more detail around those over the course of the next couple of weeks. You can find out more about my organization, 154 Advisors, by checking me out on LinkedIn. My name again is Glenn Sarvati. Our grand poobah is John Best. Enjoyed doing that conversation with John and talking to Tony Hernandez this week. As I say, a little bit more of that coming up, a lot more coming up on other topics, including the gauntlet of conference season coming with Money 2020 on the horizon, Venture Tech on the horizon, and a couple others as well. So again, no shortage. We love to hear from you. Drop us a note, and thanks as always for listening.
Check back each week for the latest from the Big Cast. Or better yet, we hope you'll consider subscribing for free via Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Tweet us at Big Fintech. Email info@big-fintech.com. Or visit us at big-fintech.com and click on the Media tab, where you can post a comment or check out our archive of hundreds of past episodes. See you next week.